In the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night.
Hello everyone, I am Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet. Today I'm going to be talking about another horror movie that is centered around teens and school, but in a very, very different way from Slaughter High. This is, of course, Class of 1999, which came out in 1990. This movie was directed and produced by Mark L. Lester, who's also known for directing Firestarter, directing Commando, and directing and producing Class of 1984, which I will talk about a little bit more in just a little bit. This movie stars Bradley Gregg, who was in Stand By Me, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It stars Pam Grier, who is known for a lot of movies. Some of her more macabre horror-adjacent work includes Escape from LA, Mars Attacks, Jawbreaker, and Ghosts of Mars. This also stars Malcolm McDowell, who's also just really well known in general, probably best known in macabre circles for A Clockwork Orange, Rob Zombie's Halloween movies, and the 80s version of Cat People, among a bunch of other things. This is a follow-up to Class of 1984, also directed and produced by Mark L. Lester, as I said. I have not seen Class of 1984. Maybe I should, and maybe I should review it, but it is a very, very loose sequel follow-up from what I've heard, and I think it stands really well on its own as its own film. This was also produced by Vestron, a very well-known company for cult horror movies. At least a couple other movies in the horror box set I'm currently reviewing are from Vestron, including Chopping Mall and Chud 2. This movie follows a post-apocalyptic version of 1999 in which there are a bunch of rival gangs of punky teenagers warring in this city in an effort to civilize them and make them pay more attention in school. The school has enlisted this company to bring in these robots that have been trained to act like teachers and look like real people to be the teachers in the school, because they are going to have a much more rigid discipline with these kids and help them sort of stay in line. This kind of works at first, but then they sort of realize that the robots are kind of going a little bit too far with their sort of discipline, even to the point of killing these kids and getting out of control. It is up to one kid in particular to first off kind of figure out what they are, why they're killing people, and put a stop to it. And it is just this really, really interesting mixture of escapist action sci-fi horror with very real social commentary to some extent. The soundtrack to this movie is very 80s, technically early 90s because this is 1990, but it was being produced in the 80s obviously. It's very, very synth heavy, which fits with the sci-fi vibes of the movie. The music was done by Michael Hoenig. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I hope I am. I think he's known for doing the soundtrack for the 80s version of The Blob, among other things, and he did a really good job with this soundtrack. There's also a lot of 80s or technically early 90s rock and pop in this that I really enjoyed. One notable inclusion is Head Like a Hole by Nine Inch Nails. The overall dystopian concept of this movie is really cool. Again, it takes the idea of these reckless teens and pushes it to the extreme of these over-the-top snotty punks committing gang violence against each other and tyrant teachers that are literally machines and disciplining kids by killing them, and it's just this really extreme dystopian sci-fi version of a school atmosphere, and it's really cool in that respect, but it's also uses that to create something that's very three-dimensional. It's kind of leaning more into sci-fi than horror sometimes, but I found this more genuinely horrifying than some of the more straight-ahead horror movies that I've reviewed on here, and horrifyingly relevant in some ways, because these teen gang members that we're watching are very snotty and nasty and disrespectful and often doing genuinely horrible things to each other, but you know that they don't deserve what is happening to them at the hands of these machines. You see kind of this violent home life that they actually have. We get to see inside the house of one of the kids, and there's this horrible drug abuse happening. It's just this really broken home, and it's legitimately really sad to watch. It was just this surprisingly bleak, modern, real picture, because you've got these people that just on the outside just look like they're just horrible, nasty, violent gang members, but they're people that just don't really have anything else to do or anywhere else to go, and they're not given an option to do anything else, even when they try to, because they've just got these heartless machines beating them within an inch of their lives and sometimes just flat out killing them. That said, near the ends, the story kind of shifts from this horrific, bleak feel to this action feel. It just doesn't have that same dark weight to it, but it was a really fun thrill ride. It didn't kind of hold me and captivate me and horrify me the way the first half did, but it was still really entertaining, really well done, just on the campier, more theatrical side in some ways than the first half of the movie. But I feel like they shifted the tones pretty well, and I wanted to kind of see this more triumphant, action-y ending and not end it on this bleak note that, had they kept the same tone, it would have had. There are some kind of weird logic things that if I really thought about them, are really weird and confusing, but I just ran with it. For one thing, there are literally only 3 teachers in this school. No school ever with that many kids is going to only hire 3 teachers. I'm sure they would have hired way more robots or enlisted actual teachers or something to try to handle that many kids, not just had 3 teachers in this one giant school, but suspend your disbelief and it's fine, I guess. I really like the punk aesthetic of the costumes of the kids. Sometimes a little bit too outrageous, sometimes I think they could have gone a little bit further with it and I would have loved it, but overall I love this sort of dystopian punk look that they went with for the costumes of the kids. Cinematography is solid, it does what it needs to do, nothing really notable there in terms of stylish shots that I can recall. I went into this movie kind of assuming that it was a low-budget B-movie kind of thing. Thinking about it more, I think they had a higher budget than I thought they did. I think they were a somewhat lower budget movie. Given that, the set design for this feels very, very immersive. There are parts of it feel like it could be just anywhere USA, but other parts of it that feel like they've really created this dystopian world, and you're seeing this kind of grim underbelly of this society and just the normal world. It doesn't feel like they just built this set anywhere. It feels like a real place. The fact that, like with Slaughter High, they used a real high school to shoot the scenes in the high school adds to that immersive, real feeling, and I really did like that. A lot of the time, the teen characters feel like these very tough, hardened thug stereotypes, and in the case of one character, the principal's daughter, this kind of very goody two-shoes character, but there is some nuance to them. We do get to see this kind of sensitive side to some of the characters and them actually talking about kind of breaking away from their image, and we get to see the principal's daughter rebel a little bit and see these other sides of the characters come out. They don't ever quite feel like real people. They always feel like movie characters, but there is depth to them that to some extent, and interesting character traits that I could appreciate. And there is a lot of variety in just their costumes and their looks. that was fun. It didn't feel like I was looking like carbon copies of the same characters over and over. That said, I really like the dastardly villain character in this, who's like the head of the company that built these robots. And I thought that was Malcolm McDowell, but I don't think it is, because later we see him playing the principal. So I don't know who that actor was. I'll put his name down here, but he did a really, really good job playing this over-the-top dastardly character who, as soon as he steps on screen at the very beginning of the movie, you know he's the villain and he's up to no good, and I love it. And he's also got these wonderfully creepy contact lenses that are great. And the robots are an interesting case. One of them is Pam Grier. She plays the chemistry teacher, and then there are the other two actors whose names I'm forgetting. I'll probably put them down here, who play the history teacher and the gym teacher. I was pretty sure school offered more subjects than that, but okay. And at first, they're obviously robots, so there's not a lot of depth to them, or this not much interesting going on with them. They're just kind of playing these cold machines that are programmed to do teacher things and then, you know, annihilate people when they don't comply with school rules. As the movie progresses, we start to see them gaining more human traits and more nuance to them, and we get to see them have a lot more attitude. They're spewing one-liners and making jokes and just riffing off each other in fun ways near the end of the movie, and they're also just becoming more aggressive and more violent because evidently they were originally military machines that had been converted into teachers. As they are gaining more human traits, they are also reverting back to their military state and becoming more aggressive, which lends itself to being kind of these snarky attitude-ish action horror characters that are really fun to watch. And there are a couple scenes in particular that I thought were really, really funny. One of them, I don't even know why. It's when our lead character is in a car chase with the three robots, and he leads them off of a bridge, and they're about to fall into this lake, and one of them just flatly says, "I hate water," and then they fall in. And it's not like that even destroys them, because they come back later, spoiler alert, but just the way before they just crash into the ocean, he just flatly sits there and says, "I hate water." Just killed me for some reason, and I do not know why. I just thought it was really funny. And then there is a scene later in the film where the history teacher robot has grabbed one of the students and is choking him, and he's choking at one point and screaming at another point, and the robot is just kind of flatly imitating his coughing and gasping sounds and his screams while just kind of staring at him wide-eyed, and it's really, really weird and fun to watch. I don't know why that choice was made, but I love it. We have the character of the principal's daughter, who's kind of the goody-two-shoes, nice girl character at the school, pretty much the only character who doesn't seem to be a gang member. We kind of know she's the love interest heroine from the get-go, but there's also this unsavory side to her where she has this horrible prejudice against the lower class people and the presumed gang members that's been inherited from her father, and she kind of has to get over that through the movie, and I thought that was cool to watch, and I'm glad that they made that a part of the character. That said, at some point she just kind of becomes the damsel in distress, and although she's in the action scenes, she's just kind of being led around by the hand by our main male hero character, and I would have liked to see her kind of hold her own against the robots much more, but she did a good job with what she was given. We have some makeup effects for blood and gore that are fairly minimal for the most part, especially near the beginning of the movie, but they get the job done because the acts of violence that are being committed are fairly grounded. They're not over-the-top, gory, grotesque kill scenes, at least not at this stage in the movie. That said, there's a scene where someone nearly burns alive, or does burn alive. They just kind of cover that person with as much bloody scar makeup as they can, and it's just like, this makeup needs to be way more extreme given that that person nearly roasted alive. Again, I think this movie had a bigger budget than I thought it did, but the action scenes are really, really impressive, I wrote down, especially considering presumably probably low budget. Again, probably higher budget than I thought, but I thought the action scenes were really well done, really impressive, especially considering both the low budget and the fact that everything had to be done on set and practically, while the robot stuff is mostly just inferred from these kind of mechanical POV shots and the way the characters are acting. Near the end of the movie, we see more of the kind of weird inner workings of the robots and more kind of outrageous robot effects, and they're really, really well done. It's this cool mix of a little bit of stop motion animation with these crazy practical effects and actual machines that they've put together. Besides the actual storytelling, it is one of the highlights of the movie. The opening part of the movie really hinges on this cool storytelling and this horror, and the second half is mostly spectacle, but it's really well done. This is way better than I expected it to be. It's a really, really good example of kind of an action sci-fi horror. It's a bit of a B movie, but better in the production value and part department than I expected it to be, and much better in the storytelling department than I expected it to be. There's some little plot holes here and there, some kind of over-the-top stereotypicalness, and I wish the heroine got to do more stuff. And the first half of the movie and the second half of the movie feel very tonally different to me, but I was on board with it the whole time, very engaged with it, if not always in the same way, and I thought it had a lot of really good stuff going for it. It is overall a really good movie, especially if you're into more of the action and sci-fi oriented horror stuff. I know some people who that is kind of their bread and butter, and if said people have not seen this movie, they do need to check it out as soon as they can. So that is my review of Class of 1999. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye.